Okay, we are going to get going on this very last session, the end of a fantastic 3-day conference. This session is focused on pre-fire planning for post-fire recovery. So we've talked a lot in the last few days about prevention, mitigation, all the different shades of that. We are now going to move into a post-fire space. So we are going to talk about the recovery process, what that looks like. We've got 4 speakers today that they're each going to talk for about 10 minutes each. They're going to tell you a little bit about programs or fires that they have experience with, and then we'll open it up for a panel discussion at the end, similar to the last format. So I want to start off by welcoming up Mick Lane, who is the program manager for the Emergency Watershed Protection Program.
Okay, good morning, everybody. So great to be with you here today. Mick Lane, I'm with the USDA NRCS. I've been with this organization about 13 years now, and I've been in this role, the program manager of the Emergency Watershed Protection Program, or EWP, about 3 years now. And yeah, I would also like to thank the organizers of this conference, this summit, who had the vision to put this together, because it's been something I've really been striving to do, is to connect with this group of folks to kind of for outreach to let everybody know what we offer at USDA, NRCS, and we kind of have a reputation with the general public and a lot of other folks just that assisting, agricultural producers, and that's definitely a big, huge, and important part of what we do. But we also provide a variety of assistance to communities through our watershed programs, which EWP is one of them, and I'll talk a bit about another one of our other programs that this is more on long-term planning, but we can really offer both sides of assistance to communities, both sides of the coin with fire, both recovery post-fire, and a lot of the work I've been involved with the past few years has been the post-fire flooding is really the main concern. And then, also planning. It's kind of a mix for us because, we get the recovery from the fire, but it also goes into planning for the future, higher runoff from the fire, which it could be decades. And a lot of the work we've been doing up in the Flagstaff area, they have multiple burns on the same land, and they haven't, those landscapes they're probably not going to go back to what they were. They've tried some different things to speed it along, some tree plantings and such, but they haven't had much luck. So yeah, I'll move along here. Next slide. Oh, is there a slide? Okay. So yeah, and I'm based out of Tucson. So just a little bit of history on our agency. So we originated in 1935 as a soil conservation service in response largely to the Dust Bowl. So our initial focus was soil erosion, and we were actually called the Soil Erosion Service briefly before being called the Soil Conservation Service. So yeah, in 1994 they changed us to NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, to be more inclusive for the different types of work we're doing. We look at, all resource concerns, plant condition, all kinds, everything out on the landscape. So, and that also came with a big expansion in the programs we offered through the years. So yeah, we work primarily on private and tribal lands in Arizona. And let's see. So yeah, as I mentioned, that our work with production agriculture is well known, but me and my coworker here at the conference, our big outreach is for our Watershed programs, which is directly to communities. So these are the two programs, so EWP, of course, but the other one that I did want to mention is the Watershed and Flood Prevention Operations Program. You'll hear it alluded to by the law, the name of the law, Public Law 566, and that's our more long-term planning program. It originated kind of back in the 40s and 50s as a flood prevention program, and a lot of the smaller dams and structures you'll see across the country we were involved with. We built a lot around the Phoenix area in Arizona, a lot of flood control structures, and a lot of the subdivision you've seen now in Phoenix are actually downstream of those. So they protect a huge amount of human life and property value now. And yeah, that program is still available, and Congress in recent years has been pretty generous to us, thankfully, that and the EWP program. So, but EWP is what we ask folks, post-fire, that's what they're reaching out to us for, and it's a really great program. It's really flexible, so we offer financial and technical assistance through it. We've provided millions of funds in Arizona the last 3 years, done some pretty big projects. We can do anything, we can get out quick, we can get resources out to communities quick. We've helped with a huge amount of sandbagging, Jersey K-rail placement to redirect water flow immediately after a burn scar, because, as we all know in Arizona, that's what typically happens, right? You get the fires spring, summer, and then if you get any significant monsoon season and the burn was upstream of a community, you're going to have some real flooding risks. So yeah, and then we can do a lot more significant work with it as well. We've done a lot of the work, and I have some good photos to show you guys. I love to show photos of the projects we're involved with, but some of the more the heavy duty work we've been involved with around Flagstaff has been getting that water off the burn scar underground, putting in subsurface drains and detention basins. And that's kind of where it gets into that mix of recovery and planning, because we've been planning for those future higher runoffs from the burn scars into the future. Like, yeah, this is with the lack of the big reduction in tree cover, the runoff's always going to be higher than it was. It's been a big deal, and we've had some great project sponsors up there. So yeah, I mentioned technical assistance and financial assistance, so we can provide funds not only for construction, but we also help our sponsors. We can provide them not only our technical assistance by going out to the sites and providing recommendations and some designs, but we can also provide them funds to hire, a good architectural and engineering firm to do an analysis of the watershed and maybe come up with some alternatives to how we deal with it. So yeah, kind of hardening, that's kind of the word I like to use, hardening these areas against future flooding after fires, just with the repeated fires in the same areas that we've seen. So yeah, the reality completely changes. You know, the needs there from flood control, obviously, from when the structures were originally built there, and then after the fire, you have a whole different flood regime come in, and it's takes a lot of work. So yeah, we can do structural and vegetative solutions. We like to do, you know, holistic, community-driven and involved solutions. And we have a variety of other programs that I didn't mention that can also be of assistance. So these are some photos. We do a lot of stream bank protection to prevent that kind of thing. A lot of flood debris removal that gets jammed up against bridge abutments or that sort of thing that kind of rediverts water. We can help pay to remove all of that. Yeah, post-wild, the flooding off of these type of burns here. So we were involved in the museum fire in 2021. This is a photo from Flagstaff of the flood. Gila bank collapse in 2022. We helped them repair that channel there. And this is some of the subsurface drainage systems that we've been working on up in the Flagstaff area. So you can see the house right next to it there. Another photo from that project going into a detention basin. So yeah, this is my final slide, just my contact information. If you guys have, I have a pocket full of my cards. If you guys want to connect, please do so before the end of the conference, and maybe in the future we can collaborate on some recovery and planning efforts. So thank you.
Okay, we've heard from Mick. Now we're going to hear from Nick. The next speaker is Nick Smith. He's a disaster program manager for the Arizona Department of Emergency and Military Affairs.
Good morning. If you don't remember me or how much money I have, please come up to me afterwards. We will discuss that. But I do want to discuss some challenges that we as a branch at AZ WUI faced and are facing, and then some things that that we are seeing kind of across the state. And so in the past, we were a team of 1, and now we are working to be a team of 9. So with it being just a team of 1, now we are playing catch up. And we are mostly caught up, but there's still that sort of issue. So when it comes to project management, we're working on it, and as our team grows, it's getting a lot quicker. Like I said in my previous presentation, we're trying to turn around our grant project timeline from 6 years to 3 years and cutting that in half. And as you saw, I got called out for it. For our past stuff, so that's okay, because we like that. So, but right now, when it comes to post-fire and the money that becomes available, like most recently with the fire that was out in the San Carlos area, Pinal County, Maricopa County, and San Carlos, they were all affected, and part of my job is to conduct outreach and get to these areas and make sure that they know that they have this massive amount of money, $2.2 million, available. And sometimes there's a bit of a struggle on my end trying to even just connect because of maybe there's old website information or there's staff turnover and things aren't updated in either our lists or their lists. A lot of what we do is we send out these grant opportunities and fundings via email, and if you're not part of our mitigation contact list right now, then you'll more than likely miss out on it, and unless we attend one of these things, and then you're here. So if you'd like to be a part of that and you have a card, please raise your hand. We'll come around and come collect that. If not, no worries, but it's $2.2 million. It's fine. So a lot of that has been my struggle so far, is trying to conduct good outreach. And another issue that we see when it comes to trying to receive these monies is that all of our grants are a cost share, so it's a 75-25 cost share for the most part across the board. There are a few stipulations with BRIC and FMA where it might be different, but we don't see it quite often. And so we'll see the smaller communities that don't quite fit the stipulations FEMA put out for the different cost share. They'll struggle to meet the local match requirement of 25%. And so with that, we say we encourage partnerships on the BRIC and FMA side on trying to meet that match. But that's something that we see a lot with the smaller towns or communities that want to have these projects, but can't afford to put in their local match of that 25%. So, and then we see a lot of burnout when it comes to actually dealing with the fire itself. And then when we come in afterwards and try to deal with the long-term recovery, they're already kind of annoyed with the administrative burnout of dealing with the fire and responding to it. So then when we come in and we're like, hey, fill out these long applications and deal with us and FEMA, they're like, we're kind of sick of it already. Can we just wait till next time around? And we see a lot of that burnout happen, and that's and we're trying to help streamline a lot of that so that way we can ease the administrative burden for our sub-applicants in our localities. So, and then another thing is time from the incident to grant submission in the past used to be a lot longer. So we would submit for a project, and it would be maybe a year or two until we actually see an award, which is an issue because we want to be able to, because fire season happens every year. So, we want to be able to get ahead of that with these projects. So, outside of that, a lot of it is just an administrative burden, is the challenges that we face on the long-term recovery post-fire side, and just dealing with the heavy workload of remaining compliant with using the federal dollars. So, but yeah, if you do want to be a part of the mitigation contact list, that way you hear about these grant funding opportunities, please let us know, give us your cards, that way we can add you, or reach out to us at mitigation@azdema.gov. And that's all I've got. Thank you.
All right, next up, we're going to welcome Rose Beaton, who is the post-fire recovery program representative from Washington State DNR. So we wanted to bring in an out-of-state perspective for this. If we could welcome Rose.
Good morning. I am fully aware that I am between you and the door right now, so thanks for hanging with me for another 10 minutes, and looking forward to it. So, my name is Rose Beaton. I'm the post-fire recovery manager with the Washington DNR. Prior to this, I have about 12 years experience of working in several facets of fire-adapted communities. I'm also part of an incident management team, have been doing that for 3-4 years, and some other response-related things. So, where's the clicker? There it is. I wanted to go over kind of how we've structured some current projects that we have at the Washington State DNR for post-fire recovery program. So we've invested in our communities and creating some community toolkits Emily Triosi presented a little bit earlier about CWPPs and the Washington Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network. They're working on creating toolkits with different facets of recovery, so debris abatement, different categorical subject matters, and how to lead a community through engaging that process. We've also invested about $900,000 in reforestation, so growing trees is a long game, like Tucson can attest to. So we're investing in seedling production, cone collection, and then also we've just started some sagebrush, so that's pretty exciting that we don't see happen. Oh, okay. All right, a quick geography lesson for those of you guys unfamiliar with the upper left. On the green side, it's very wet. On the east side, it's very dry. The fire regime, I kind of took a picture of, this is near Mount Rainier. This is the typical fire regime that we see. You know, it's kind of interesting with the Sonoran Desert, you guys talk about fire exclusion. Well, similarly, in these rainforest environments, we're not adapted to wildfire in that respect. So we'll see a 1,000-year fire regime interval. On the right-hand side, that's near the Columbia Basin, so we have a lot of sagebrush steppe, and this fire regime is about 30 years, and it's also annual grasses. We have fire that carries through very fast. So in contrast, on the west side of the state, you know, once a fire gets established, it's gonna be burning all year, or all season, and then we have very quick ramp up and ramp downs on the east side of the state, usually. So, a real life example. So a lot of people talk about Lahaina. Well, we had 267 homes lost, 900 structures, and we also, this was a period of like 72 hours that this occurred. The initial loss was within about 24 hours. So we have the Oregon and Gray fires near Spokane, which is near the border of Idaho. And you can see it's the same county. So this occurred at August 18th, 2023. Within 4 hours, we had a second ignition, being the upper corner, being Oregon fire in a completely different environment. So we had two different responses. And I think what you can gather from this picture, or these two pictures, is those communities are gonna be vastly different. So their needs are gonna be different. We're gonna be dealing with more forest, and then on the right-hand side, you can see, you know, it's more small lots kind of thing. And also a challenge to the fire investigators in here, can you spot where the ignition happened on the Gray fire? Right up there, if I could point. It's pretty clear. So, Oregon fire, we had small forested lots. They're a little bit larger, so those kind of complexities happen where, you know, we talked about values and communities and interacting with them. Well, these communities didn't necessarily want to, didn't respond to public open houses, which is very traditional with an incident management team structure. So looking in the future, really tailoring it to the community where it's more one-on-one, informal spaces where we interact with the community. And that's been with our service foresters that go out and meet the landowner one-on-one. On top of that, the complexities of working in a forested environment, well, small private forest landowners most likely don't know that the process for salvage logging until they get there. They also don't know about the mandated laws to reforest their property, and then how do you explain to that landowner that we don't have seed stock to reforest your property? So that is a very uncomfortable situation. And so with our hope with investing in some of those program things I showed earlier, we can help us mitigate a little bit of that process. Jumping over to the Gray fire. So you guys saw that it's small lot sizes, so it's more community, suburban-based structures. Well, within that framework, a lot of communities have a strong community leadership where they're able to navigate a federal structure and bang on doors and advocate for their community. Where in the Oregon fire, it was more fragmented. These people didn't really work together in that sense. So with the Great Fire, we found that leadership, they were doing great. They were knocking on doors right after trying to stabilize the emergency and move into this public assistance, individual assistance. Well, the complexities with that is that within the emergency declaration world, sometimes those damage assessment thresholds are variable, and our community leadership don't necessarily understand the thresholds and the variations of getting those emergency declarations to open the door to the FEMA funding. Lastly, with the Great Fire, there was mental institutions that not necessarily our emergency managers in that county quite knew about. And so it's never a good thing to have that surprise when you're trying to evacuate and move on for that. And so I'm thankful nothing happened to those facilities. However, it is imperative that we plan for what's next before it's next. In my county in 2012, we had a shelter in place with a chimpanzee retirement home kind of thing, and you can't let those guys loose. So, well, I mean, if you're in North Carolina, maybe they'll get out. But anyway, so we've really taken a strong hold on planning for recovery. So similar to Emily Triosi and the work of the FACNet and WAFAC, we're looking at it kind of reverse engineering, where in this space, we may be looking at wildfire professionals, management, to inform our decisions. Well, in this case, we focus on the local jurisdictions, especially our public works, our municipalities and solid waste streams, and our long-term recovery groups, which unfortunately, in 2014, we had the Carlton Complex fire, which, I mean, that's like a lifetime ago, pre-COVID, nobody remembers. But we had debris, homes ruined, a lot of damages from that. And from that fire triggered the Okanagan Long-Term Recovery Group, has been instrumental in Washington fire recovery. So how can we put this in action? So in Kittitas County in Washington DNR, we're doing a pilot project where we're building out a section of actions that could be tailored to different communities and more apt to their characteristics. So some things in the Gray Fire are more applicable because they're more suburban HOA, and then some areas we want to focus more on the reforestation side or stuff like that. Debris abatement always comes up, so we want to focus on that. There's different types of debris. Lithium batteries, we have the vehicles, of course, and then we also have asbestos when you go and try to rebuild. And sometimes that tests hot, so what do you do with the topsoil? Where does it go when your county isn't prepared for that? We also have suppression to recovery. So depending on your land jurisdiction, when the fire occurs, there's different repair processes, and they may or may not be adequate. And we're not gathering that data as far as fencing and that type of repair that could impact a farmer or a rancher. That's like a $60,000 fence, and that's probably on the low side. And lastly, post-fire debris flooding. It was kind of mentioned, but focusing on alluvial fans and using GIS exercises and partnerships with the Washington Geological Survey to really identify those areas in the CWPP, so we know some areas are more susceptible, and then partner with our local public works, our state Department of Transportation, and then also address some sedimentation concerns as well, as we always do. Lastly, that we have After the Flames. So if you want to go to Washington State, we are hosting the After the Flames conference with Coco. So it'll be held actually in my backyard, and we do have a lot of burn scars and landslides and stuff if you want to check it out. And hopefully our CWPP will be finished. That is the QR code for our post-fire program, and you can also see our facilitated learning analysis. I didn't go even scratch the surface on Oregon and Gray Fire, but you can go and look at all the operational lessons learned and evacuation stuff. And thank you for letting me be here and present. Thank you.
All right, and our last speaker before we get into the panel discussion here is going to be Carl Melford, who's the emergency manager with Gila County.
Hello, Carl Melford. Thank you guys for having me here today. I am the emergency manager for Gila County, also a member at large for Arizona Association of Emergency Managers. If you don't know where Gila County is, you guys have seen that map a lot of times that has the big blotchy spot where all the wildfires and WUI is. That's us. So that'll help you find us on a map. I've been native to Arizona since 1995. I am a big plan nerd. People often ask what the first plan I wrote was. It was actually a zombie apocalypse survival plan in my junior year of high school, which was around the same time I started my fire science courses. I was in fire science for about a year and a half until they decided to put the class after lunch, which I was late too often and got kicked out. So as any other broken-hearted young man that wanted to go into fire service that was not able to do so would do, I went into law enforcement. So, hope there's no cops here. I'm getting pulled over on the way back. I started my law enforcement career in the Gila County Jail. First plan I did there was actually an evacuation plan that I had found from the 80s sitting on a shelf. I pulled it down, revised what I could, and ended up turning it into my supervisor saying, hey, I took this on as a project, you know, and I get called into the jail commander's office a week later, and I'm like, oh no, I'm in trouble. Well, they actually approved that plan, and that sparked something in me. The planning nerd in me just kind of took off from that point forward. I tried to do more, and I was kind of confined to this box. And in law enforcement, everything's in boxes. This is what you do, this is what you're here for, stick to that. I said, okay. In 2011, I went to the police academy here in Tucson, Siletzi, graduated and was put on the road with the City of Gila Police Department. Started taking interest in ICS courses and wanted to apply that to my job. Again, kind of stuck in that box, stay in your lane. In 2015, I fell into emergency management and absolutely fell in love with the job because there is no box. One of the first projects, and I won't bore you with the details of it, I was given from my supervisor. He said, hey, I want you to get from A to Z. And I said, okay, well, what are steps B, C, D? And he said, it doesn't matter how you get there, just get there. I said, okay. There's a quote from Steve Jobs that he will assign the laziest person the most difficult job because he'll find the easiest way to do it. I wouldn't say that I'm lazy, but I would say that I am an advocate for innovation and convenience. So I really like that creative ability to kind of navigate within the scope of the job and think outside of the box. So my supervisor at Glo PD when I left into emergency management said, you're going to be bored out of your mind. There are no disasters in Gila County. Well, from 2015 to 2020, we've had about 30 plus wildfires with a total of a little over 920,000 acres of area burned. We've issued at least 60 individual evacuation notices. We've had multiple hazmat scenarios and winter storms, and even recently, a tornado. And of course, something big happened in 2020, and I was assigned to be the incident commander for Gila County for the pandemic. By 2021, I was pretty over it. So our wildfire season kicked off, and many of you are familiar with the Telegraph Fire. That fire started. But one thing that isn't talked about during the Telegraph Fire that I feel needs to be is also the Mescal Fire and the Backbone Fire. Mescal Fire started on June 1st, with 72,250 acres. Telegraph Fire on June 4th, 180,750 acres, destroying 51 structures. And the Backbone Fire, June 16th, burning 40,855 acres. And for a while, we kind of balanced responding to the pandemic and those fires all at once. And I think that's the fun part of emergency management is we get to kind of be the jack of all trades, right? And I think that's the biggest thing that helps you the most is building that network so you can be that jack of all trades, master of none. It kind of reminds me of the guy from Pawn Stars, where somebody will ask about a really niche thing and he goes, oh, I know a little bit about that, but hey, my buddy knows way more about that. I feel like in emergency management and in this field, we get to kind of be that Pawn Stars guy and have somebody for everything. Bet you guys didn't think there was a Pawn Stars joke going to be in here. So evacuations were probably the biggest part of the telegraph fire and the Mescalin backbone as well. Going into the evacuation notices, we partner with the sheriff's office to coordinate evacuations. We also do the mass notifications, the PSAs and everything in partnership with the sheriff's office. During the telegraph fire, we had 5 set notices go out that reached 7,612 people, and then 13 set to go notices reaching 11,866 people. At the time, we had probably a 50% percentile of registered users in our notification system, so you can imagine that number to be in the neighborhood of double. So going into some of the planning portion, and the lines between planning, mitigation, and preparedness, when you're talking about fire to post-fire, are very blurred. A lot of your fire recovery becomes post-fire flood mitigation. So the Pinal fire burned within the scar of the telegraph fire back in 2017. So when the telegraph fire came over, a lot of the area that had burned in 2017 was the least affected when it comes to post-fire flooding effects. I think that's a huge point to bring up because the Pinal fire was a firefighter's dream in a sense, because it started at the top of a hill, it burned down, the conditions were prime, so it was a managed fire and it did a lot of really good mitigation work. It was difficult on the public end because this was a community that was not used to wildfire, but it was actually a very beneficial fire for the landscape, and that proved to be solid evidence in the telegraph fire. So some of the planning portions that came in here were identifying shelter locations, having solid evacuation plans, signing people up for our notification systems. So that all came to play during the wildfire season. So then we started thinking into post-fire flooding effects. The Pinal Mountain Range received an average over the past 5 years of about 1.6 inches of precipitation during a monsoon season. So I thought, surely, it's not gonna be too bad. This year's not gonna be too much different. In 2021, we got 17.5 inches of rain on the telegraph fire scar. So we had about 250 properties that were flooded with damage. Around that time, HB 2001 was passed, putting $100 million towards wildfire, $30 million specifically of that towards post-fire flood mitigation. That money went through DEMA and DFFM. David Tenney, and then later replaced by Tom Torres, have been great partners throughout that, as well as our folks at DEMA. Through those funding sources, we were able to do about $8 million in post-fire flood mitigation work. This includes hydrology. We brought in hydrology engineers to help out with post-fire flood modeling. We were able to get some rain gauges and even rain cameras to kind of have an idea of what was coming downstream. Creek cleanup was probably the biggest part of it. And that's difficult because Gila County did not own the vast majority of the creeks. Gila County's properties are often, the parcels will go into the creeks. So if you're looking at an individual section of creek, there's probably 30 property owners of that creek. So we had teams going out getting temporary easements, and we hired pretty much every contractor in the area to go through and remove debris out of these creeks that see water maybe 2 weeks out of every year. And that helped tremendously. A good example of that is there's a specific bridge right in downtown Globe that probably had, I'd say, about 5 or 6 feet of sediment that had built up. There was overgrown brush, there was deadened down, and there was trash. So about 6 feet was removed, and when that creek ran, the water came flush with the top of the creek. And that first rainstorm, just to give you guys an example of the strength of it, there's a bridge that goes to our hospital. It's got a full 4-foot box culvert underneath. When they were cleaning that up, we saw pieces of metal coming out from under there. They're using equipment to pull that out. Mind you, this is a 4-foot box culvert. And what that metal was a full-sized horse trailer that was forced underneath that culvert. And it came out in pieces. So we did a bunch of outreach. We used volunteer groups to fill sandbags, full-time staff to fill sandbags. We worked with DEMA to staff an individual assistance service center, while all our nonprofits basically set up a one-stop shop for resources for the community. A community resource center where all the donations that were coming in because of how public this incident was were filtered out to the people. So cleanup kits and stuff like that, hydration. Debris removal was a huge part of it. This was not just one flooding event. It was probably, I think, 26 major flooding events. And to this day, on the west side of the fire where El Capitan is, a significant rain will flood out some of their roads because that fire intensity on that west side was just so bad that there has not been much recovery. So that was a huge part of the recovery. And like with all of these things that I talked about, it's very difficult to kind of see the difference between what is fire recovery versus post-fire flooding planning. And they're, in a sense, one and the same. Recovering from fire is preparing for post-fire flooding. That's pretty much all I have for you guys today. Before I end, I did want to share one bit of information. An individual strand of spaghetti is called a spaghetto. So if you didn't like my presentation, at least you could say you learned something. Thank you, guys.
Okay, on that note, we're going to bring all the speakers up, and we've got a few pre-planned questions, and then we'll open it up to the floor to get the conversation going. Okay, so I think this conversation has really illustrated the importance of this kind of pre-fire planning, and I think one of the challenges is that every fire is really different on the front end and the back end. So I'm wondering if the panel has some thoughts on how you start to think about sequencing actions after fire, knowing that there's no right order. How do you figure out what the steps are in that post-fire environment to move forward?
So for my emergency management department specifically, I try to build as good of a team in my EOC as possible to handle the day-to-day and what's coming in. And then I pester my plan section chief because my mindset is already on tomorrow and the next day. And just thinking of all the possible outcomes that can come from the effects of today, so we're ahead for tomorrow. Another kind of point for me is once we start to see containment on the fire, usually once we hit like 20-30% containment on the fire, that's when you see that huge increase come day to day. And that's when I start kind of shifting that mindset towards post-fire flooding and fire recovery. So once you're seeing containment, you already have, you don't have a final idea. There's not going to be enough data to predict what your post-fire flooding is going to look like, but you will have a general idea. And you don't always have time to wait for flood modeling. You don't always have time to wait for burn severity. The Telegraph fire was fully extinguished, I want to say, July 5th, and our first flooding event was July 4th. So you don't often, nature's never going to work in our favor. Nature's never going to respect boundaries or timelines. So we have to start thinking ahead and start planning as soon as we are available to.
So I think post-fire recovery happens on a continuum. You have the emergency initial stabilization of the incident, which usually occurs within a first month or 6 months, and then you have a short-term period, or they call it short-term, a 1 to 2 year period, and then you have this longer period piece that plays out into 5 year and so on. And so I think informing your CWPPs with those actions that can phase out into different pieces is an incredible opportunity. Short-term housing, long-term housing, partnering with community-based organizations, filling in those gaps at different periods of time. Yeah, it probably won't be specific, but that's the point of building flexibility into your planning processes, so when it is a need, you can pull from it and hopefully get access those funds.
Yeah, with our agency, we're a federal agency, so we have our field offices. We usually don't have a huge local presence, but we do our best to get we get our people out as soon as possible. But from our end, we look at it kind of mirrors the policy of our EWP program, what it's meant to protect. So human life, and then human health, and then property is the priority. So, and the work we assist with is more watershed work. So, we're kind of part of the resources that the local communities can avail themselves of. And so, we rely on the local sponsors for their leadership for sure, to prioritize, and we assist with not just fires and floods, but across the nation, everything, hurricanes, and tornadoes. So, but yeah, for us, we kind of have, the flexibility of the program. A lot of times we'll do multiple agreements with the local sponsors. We'll do a real short-term one, like a 10-day agreement to place sandbags, do immediate kind of mitigation, and like one of the previous people said, once things kind of stabilize, we can start moving to more long-term solutions.
Yeah, I guess if I have anything to say for that question, is just tracking the fire, and then when those FMAGs come in, just being there for the localities and ensuring that they have the opportunity to hear about the money that's present for them, specifically for them, and making sure they get priority.
Great. Okay, so all of our panelists, I think, mentioned FEMA in their presentation at some point. And we know that FEMA has limited capacity. There are things they can do, there are things they can't do. I want to ask the panel how you navigate kind of that limited capacity at the federal level when you're at a more local level operating, whether it's the agency or the place. How do you navigate the limited capacity that comes down from above?
For us, since DEMA is the middleman for the money, it boils down to adapting to both the locality and getting what FEMA wants and needs to be able to make the money flow. So whether that be, how a certain locality does their invoices or proof of payments or anything like that, to just how they communicate as well, whether or not they're bad at email and we need to go in person and work with them to be able to make something happen, or email is the best case scenario.
From the county perspective, the best advice that I can give is to be creative. And I don't see any FEMA folks in the room, so I can speak safely here. For a rural county, it would be next to impossible to get a federal declaration for a disaster. The caps are just too high financially that we will more than likely never see a federal disaster, at least in our county. With state disasters, definitely more attainable, but the reason I say be creative is because if it weren't for that House bill money, we would not have had the mitigation measures in place. And that was not a 75% reimbursement, that was a fully funded project with a quick turnaround. So we decided to go that avenue for the funding for mitigation. So definitely be creative, talk to your public officials, have them make some noise on behalf of your organization to see what funding is available and to try to open whatever doors that they can for you.
Yeah, I like this question because with FEMA, if there's a presidential declaration, we're the way the workflow is, we're supposed to kind of fall under their umbrella. They're supposed to be the lead agency, but we're not dependent on a presidential declaration. Our state conservationist can declare one herself, so it hasn't limited us at all. But I know our folks in our national office in Washington D.C. have been working with FEMA to try to get us more aligned and kind of do an updated memorandum of agreement or a memorandum of understanding for how we're supposed to work together. So yeah, I mean, most of the projects we've done, I mean, rarely do we see a presidential declaration, but we've still gotten a lot of resources out.
I mean, what the heck is DNR doing with FEMA? So with the Oregon and Gray fires, I think we're fortunate in our post-fire recovery program that we're kind of perpetual line steppers. So we really did advocate for our community and the Gray fire specifically when it came to the individual assistance and the public assistance damage thresholds, because if it was left to the community, they did great, but they lacked the institutional knowledge of navigating a crazy bureaucratic program. And so that's where we stepped up with our previous planning efforts, House bills, wildfire management protection strategy, blah, blah, blah. So typically you don't see a Department of Natural Resources playing in that role, but I think showing up for the community is imperative.
Oh, fantastic. And the last question I'll ask before we open it up to the floor, we have a lot of state representation in the room today. So wondering if the panel could talk a little bit more about where you see the state fitting into these processes, how you can leverage state agencies or entities in the post-fire recovery process.
So I think that we need to view our state and federal agencies the kind of the way that, at least from the county perspective, that we want our partners to view us, right? I feel like when we have the EOC activated and we're supporting public safety agencies, sometimes they are just so far in the weeds and so busy that they are focused on that one task that we can support by kind of seeing that overarching field of view. And if they get caught up in something that, is time consuming or just overall takes them away from their mission, we can say, hey, let us take that on for you. I've always tried to live by the motto to preserve partnerships, that we will step up without overstepping, right? So when your state agencies are coming in saying, hey, what can we do to support? Don't be afraid to say, like, hey, this is my challenge right now. Even if they can't help you, odds are they know an agency that can. So relying on them is kind of like that backup. When you're so focused on one portion of your job, they are still freed up to kind of see that overarching field of view. So it's definitely scalable because, I imagine they would look at their federal agencies the same way. And, our municipal agencies are looking at the county agencies that way. Just look at them as somebody who has that field of view that's just a little bit wider of yours, and don't be afraid to lean on them for either expertise or support from that perspective.
So Mick alluded a little bit earlier about the post-fire recovery coordination memorandum of understanding that just came out with the federal agencies. And I think as a state agency holding federal entities accountable in the recovery process, especially FEMA, is important. And then on the other level, we have a responsibility, and the community has a responsibility to show up in the planning efforts too. So we have to be met in the middle. That way we can ramp up capacity with already stretched resources at the local level, but we have a plan in place that we could scale up.
What was the question again? Just want to make sure I answer it properly.
How we can leverage state agencies and entities in the recovery process the most effectively.
I think, okay, that was what I remembered it to be. Okay, so I think transparency so far at least in my year of being here with Colorado as well, has been huge for us. And using, we do need to work more together with other state agencies, and we have so far, and they've been able to provide data and more funding and whatnot. So, but I think transparency is a big word there.
Okay, we're going to open it up to the floor. Any questions, raise your hand, and we'll have a mic runner come over to you.
All right, so I'm currently working on my CWPP, and we're talking about preventive, during, and after. You're the after group. If you're gonna write one line of post-fire component or goal for your CWPP, what would that one post-fire goal be in that document?
Watershed maintenance, because that's something that can be forgotten so easily. Where you have that accumulation of trash or deadened down or just overall sediment. To give an example on that, on the Telegraph fire, the creeks that flooded, like I said, only see water a couple times, maybe a couple weeks out of the year. I've been in Globe since 1995, and I remember when those creeks ran year-round, and they were kind of self-cleaning in a sense. Nowadays, not so much. I mean, there's parts of the creek where you can't even see the floor of the creek. There's so much growth in there. And a lot of it ended up being neglected for multiple reasons. Some were just complacency, and some were because of land ownership disagreements. But if your watersheds aren't maintained, you will have post-fire flooding issues. That debris, whether it makes an issue of where it's at or not, it's going to make an issue somewhere before it gets to its final destination. So I feel like that's something that definitely needs to be addressed in the CWPP.
I'll go if you need more ideas.
Oh, no, I'm all for ideas, because what applies to me may not apply to somebody else.
Well, so playing the game of hazard mitigation planning, like increasing coordination capacity and resources to address post-fire or to recover, oh my God, I had it in my head. For post-fire activities, protecting private property, infrastructure, and ecosystem services.
Oh, we got a question at the back. Oh, go ahead.
I don't know enough, sorry.
Okay. It's pretty overwhelming, right? All the things, and we're asking community wildfire protection plans to kind of become more than what they were originally intended to with this. And so I'm wondering, from your experience, do the county hazard mitigation plans that exist get down to a more granular level in what you've seen, so that we can just reference from a CWPP back over to that without having to reinvent the wheel? Because regardless of the source of the flooding, that seems a more appropriate place to be addressing those types of things. And I'm just thinking of the practicality and small rural communities trying to work on these things. We need to provide them resources and help. Not just be like, oh, and now you have to have all this stuff in here about FEMA and how you're going to deal with FEMA. I mean, like, there's got to be a line here somewhere where we just point them in the right direction. So maybe you can just speak somehow to how those mitigation plans fit and can maybe take the place of some of this burdensome stuff that might otherwise take over a CWPP.
Yeah, so I like to make sure that plans are consistent. So a lot of times a CWPP will allude to something that you can find in further detail in the multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan. So post-fire flooding being one of them, it can be mentioned in your CWPP, and then, not to burden people with the gory details that are going to be in the MJHMP, just say, refer to this county's MJHMP for further expansion on that. And making sure that those plans are parallel and cohesive. We reference our other plans in plans quite often, and it helps to keep from our plans being redundant or just, you know, kicking that dead horse of a certain project when it just, you know, touches on it and references the plan that's going to be covered in more detail.
There are resources like the Fire Adapted Communities Toolkit that kind of inventory a lot of these practices that are general enough to incorporate into a CWPP, but you know, able to put in action. And so I've never had in my experience where a hazard mitigation plan went down specifically and very you know, place-based. But that's generally where we go with this CWPP, but we make sure to maintain flexibility and some generality in that practice and focus on the FAC wheel rather than, you know, you're gonna achieve this amount of, you know, whatever metric, quantitative metric.
So one go back real quick. Earlier or yesterday in a presentation, somebody put up the quote from President Eisenhower about plans being useless, but planning being everything. I think that definitely applies here as well. And as a plan nerd, that hurts a little bit, but it is the truth. That, you know, however much detail you put into about those specific topics, it's more important and you get more out of it just discussing those with your partners and bringing awareness to it. It is important to have some of those details in that plan, especially when it comes to funding or meeting deliverables. But one way or another, you're getting people talking about it. You know, if you are talking about post-fire flooding effects in a CWPP meeting and you've got somebody from a municipality that is a landowner on a creek that starts thinking like, oh man, we haven't done any work in there in probably 20 years. I should probably get someone on that. You've just made a huge difference by just discussing something. So I think that as important as those plans are and as important as the details are, the planning process is the most beneficial out of all of it.
Any other questions? Oh,
yeah. I have a question for Rose. There's really only a handful of Western states that I'm aware of that actually have the post-fire managers. What is your take on the value of that position to, you know, and what's your advice to states that don't have those positions yet?
Well, I think it's necessary more and more. I don't think we're going to get away with it. In addition to community resilience and providing capacity for community wildfire protection planning and place-based adaptation. As far as post-fire goes, the opportunity to damage our state and oh my gosh, in like Watershed, and we have a lot of surface drinking watershed in Forest Service land and stuff, but the impact has on these downstream communities. So it's necessary for us to maintain relationships with the GNA and other mechanisms to ensure that in the event of these fires, and they are going to happen, that we can lessen that impact. And yeah, so I think it's a necessary thing, and I encourage Washington State is very fortunate in some of our planning efforts. So we have a 20-year Eastern Forest Health Strategic Plan. We also have the Western Washington Forest Action Plan, and we have a Wildland Fire Management Protection Plan. And all these things are based around not only science, but also climate change and actions that we as a state want to partner with our local partners and Fed partners to address this problem together.
Tom?
This is actually sort of a follow-up to what you just said. My question was going to be in Washington in particular, but for everyone in general. I think if you're old enough, you realize that bad fire years now are burning a lot of acres, even if they're not burning a lot of structures necessarily. I mean, so a lot of acres are being burned, and we certainly should be expecting more in the future with climatic changes. I'm talking about the Western United States. And you did mention, I think you mentioned a lack of seeds for recovery, and I'd like to know sort of what specifically are you doing in Washington, and what are other people thinking about specifically in other areas in the Western U.S. to say, look, we're going to have millions of acres where we used to have hundreds of thousands of acres. How are we going to propagate things? What are you actually doing now, if anything, to build up some seed banks, not in the soil, but seed banks that you can then take out to the field.
Exactly. So we do have some seed banks that we have a Webster nursery funded by the state, or partially funded by the state, that we partner with, where we are working on our seedlings, and then on top of that, we have some programs that we are standing up as far as cone collection. So one of the results after the Oregon and Gray fires is a lot of partners, well, not a lot, but enough, we're walking around collecting cones. So we have kind of channeled that energy, and we're looking to expand that. On top of that, we've partnered with Idaho, where they're starting to store some of our seedlings, ponderosa pine, for reforestation. And then also we partnered with our special purpose districts, so conservation districts. They usually have plant sales. And so we're working in tandem with Washington State Conservation Commission on providing seedlings to the private landowners, but also scaling up that federal side as well. And additionally, the sagebrush thing is a new one, and so I'm really excited to see what in the future. This is maybe a factoid about Washington, but 60% of our sagebrush steppe is being lost at a rate every year, the old growth sagebrush. So that is astronomical, and so it's imperative that we start that process to mitigate that. And like you guys mentioned, the invasive species, we have cheatgrass. So we're up against the wall as well.
So I will preface my question with a little bit of information. It's complicated, right? Post-fire recovery is complicated. You know, I just think about the different programs that have been discussed up here, and I just want to say that there's a lot of interest in simplifying all the programs that are available to local emergency management people like Carl and elected officials at the local level. And a lot of these issues are mentioned in the commission report that's been mentioned in previous days. So just wanted to make folks aware that there's a lot of people that are trying to figure out how to simplify this stuff. And so in the short term, we're sort of stuck with the systems we have, the programs we have. In Arizona, a big part of the state is zoned where a lot of fire risk is, as I mentioned the other day. A lot of that fire risk is on the federal jurisdiction, either Forest Service or BLM or Park Service. And when there's a fire, those different jurisdictions have responsibilities and programs. And so in the short term, I'm really curious to understand how the federal agencies are cooperating, coordinating to simplify in the short term. Mention was made of an MOU between the federal agencies and FEMA. I'm wondering if somebody could talk to what is contained in that and where we can find more information, because it seems sort of important to know that.
I have the link that I can provide to folks, but you're the federal agency if you want to, the NRCS, MOU, okay. Oh.
Yeah, so, I mean, we've been kind of a small player until recently in the state. But yeah, I mean, it's a good point. It is complicated. I'm not sure what the solution is other than just better coordination, obviously, which we're making an effort in on our part in NRCS Arizona. But, you know, just a vast array of different funding sources, and the landowning agencies, they're, yeah, it just, so, yeah, we're kind of the private land picture, but, you know, they have they can work the same authorities, like Forest Service. I think we can actually provide some funding to them. So yeah, point taken. I mean, I wish I had a solution for it, but.
So a couple, I'm not sure if these are answers or just thoughts inspired by what you said, but when you're talking about, you know, programs and stuff that help with post-fire flood recovery and even, you know, wildfire prevention, we've really been interested in exploring more with Firewise and defensible space. Northern part of our county has been very Firewise focused. The southern part of our county with the desert brush, not so much. So we would definitely like to explore and see more coming out of that Firewise prevention. And I think that putting that education and some of that responsibility back on the landowners is important. It's not always a popular, fun thing to do, to tell somebody like, hey, there's stuff that you have to do too. Nobody wants to hear the government tell them what they have to do. But I mean, the entire purpose of this conference is wildland urban interface, right? And people think of defensible space and fire-wise and living in the interfaces, you know, what can I do to protect my property from the fire risk that comes from the forest? Well, we also have to look at it as that same tool is also protecting the forest from the fire risk of your property, because we've seen a lot of fires come from the forest into residential areas, but we've also seen that the other way around. So I think that, you know, putting some of that responsibility back on the homeowners and, you know, trying to help educate and show them resources. So, you know, I know there's a lot of grants available for private homeowners to help with defensible space and property cleanups. I think that's something that we need to think about and push towards, and that also, in a sense, helps us with the recovery portion, because we may never get to that recovery portion if we're putting those preventative measures in place. Another thought was when you talked about simplifying planning. That's something that, you know, we hope to see on the state level, we hope to see on the federal level, but we also try to implement on the county level. A good example of that was working on our evacuation plans. We had never really discussed what an evacuation plan looks like in a post-fire flooding situation. On the Telegraph in specific, there's 3 main canyons that were affected in their flood space, and they all have properties along the roads in them. And we got asked, you know, hey, what's that evacuation notice look like once you get the rain gauge alert? And I got to thinking about it, and there's about 5 minutes from the time that water hits the rain gauge to when that water comes to the first house. And all 3 of those canyons form into one road that goes through a low water crossing and over the world's tiniest, most insecure bridge. And that is the only way out of there. So I brought together a meeting with the sheriff's office, and I said, hey, I have this wild idea. Most of the homes sit at a higher elevation than the roads do, and there are 2 critical fail points in the only exit out of these communities. There was one other exit that seemed to be a little safer, but I thought that the best idea was that with that messaging, instead of saying, you know, evacuate now or anything like that, it was going to say shelter in place or head to high ground. Because my worst fear was bottlenecking everyone on a road and that road getting overtopped with water and we have drownings. Well, that did happen. We did have that level of flooding. The one road that we considered to be the safest was Russell Road, which completely washed away into the creek. And we had all of those roads overtopped, and we made it through that entire event without a serious injury or a casualty. So I think that looking at that planning piece, being creative and using those common sense solutions develops better plans and could potentially save lives. I know I sidebarred, but I think some of that was relevant to your question.
Real quick, because I'm not as knowledgeable as everybody up here, but I know for sure, and I'm sure as you're aware, that's our biggest challenge is duplication of efforts and and finances. That's our hard stop for a lot of our grants. So maybe that's a discussion to be held at a higher level, but for sure that's one of the biggest issues that we face when it comes to all of the wildfire mitigation techniques that we say that we can offer to do and fund, but when it comes down to where is it going to be at, which land, that's certainly an issue we run into. So
I just thought of an additional point I wanted to make. At least on the federal side, I know some of the kind of messiness comes from just from how the funding is provided, right? It's provided by Congress, and our EWP program is a good example. I mean, it's a political process, and I'm not going to get into that, but the point is there's not, for EWP, there's not a regular, provision of funds to it. It's usually when there's enough disasters happening and there's enough communities clamoring for it, then Congress will allocate more funding for it. So, I mean, one thing that I think would be very helpful is if we could advocate for, regular annual funding, kind of like we get like through the Farm Bill. But if we had more of a bank set up for emergency funding, I think that that'd be helpful, because right now a lot, from what I see, a lot of communities, you know, they reach out to everyone they can to see, you know, who has funding available. So just another thought.
I hate to stop a fantastic conversation because I know we have some other questions, but we are already a little bit over time on this session. So I'm going to ask us to thank our speakers, and if you want to follow up with them, please come and find them before the next 15 minutes when it ends. Thank you so much.
So that was very informative and obviously a big piece in a small section of what we're able to talk about, but a large piece of what we're going to be dealing with in communities. My name is Andi Thode. I'm a professor at Northern Arizona University. I'm a fire ecologist. I'm also the lead for the Southwest Fire Science Consortium and the director for the Arizona Wildfire Initiative. So I've been very happy to be able to sit in this room for the last 3 days and get to know a whole bunch of people, hear the conversations going on, and see everyone coming together to try and think about these issues in the WUI and how we can actually move forward. We've covered a lot of ground, from basically the really big statewide picture down to communities and even individual homeowners. We've talked about how to think about what a community actually is, to how do we reach that community and think about justice in those communities. And I thought I'd just add a few thoughts from folks from the Menti yesterday about what they had learned. There was actually quite a few comments about the urban forestry piece, and one is that I learned about the importance of urban forestry and how amazing it is and the incredibly unique challenges that go with that. Quite a few comments on insurance, from super negative to to let's move forward, but this is kind of the one that summed it all up in a great way, I thought, which is fire insurance is a huge barrier and opportunity, and I do believe that when you have barriers, there's also opportunities for people to come together and think about those things. Another one was the importance of having a dedicated, usable CWPP cannot be overstated, and I think that's a really important perspective from, we've had multiple conversations on funding, and those are really critical for those funding flows. And the last one I'm going to throw out there is that for a community to trust you, you must show first and then tell. And I think that's a really, really important point that we can kind of sit with. So really, everything discussed probably was not exactly pertinent to every single person here, but I think the fact that everyone is here to listen and think about that bigger picture, even if it's a little outside your box, really sets us up for thinking about new connections and new collaborations. And that is really what these events are about. It's stopping us all for a moment from our really busy jobs, pick our head up from the computer and our phones, right? And look at the person next to us and start talking about what might be possible and how do we do that. Build new collaborations and new partnerships. So I'm really happy that I feel like I did that. I'm hoping the rest of you felt like you came out of this with that. But I am going to repeat Gabe's challenge to you in the new year as you're thinking about things. You know, set a goal to reach out to at least 1 or 2 people that you met here that you hadn't been talking to before. Make sure you don't let those things drop, because it's the holidays. We all are about ready to check out. The other thing I just want to bring up, the last few things, is that the Southwest Fire Science Consortium and the Arizona Wildfire Initiative have a tremendous number of support options for you, in the sense we have so many products. New products are going to be coming out like you wouldn't believe. We've been on a huge push the last year and a half with the Wildfire Initiative to be able to help augment things that are happening. So please, if you are interested in those, if you found any of the materials out on the tables helpful, get your name on our newsletter so that you can be informed of all the new things and new opportunities, and ideally, another one of these that comes in the future. We are interested in perpetuating these into the future. We're very interested in building partnerships to do that and connecting with people that want to help us do that. So please also let us know that. I think the last thing I'm just going to close with really quick is logistics. So those attending the development meeting, that's going to be in the copper room over by the elevators. So don't get lost. And we'll start that right sharp at noon. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for hanging in there. This is, you know, out of the number of people that were in here to start, I think this is one of the workshops where I've seen the most number in the room at the end as well, which I take as a good sign. I've organized a lot of these things. So we appreciate you hanging in there, and it's really nice to meet a bunch of you, and please get home safely.